Harlem, New York, was alive that night, in a way only Harlem could be in the mid-1930s. Music spilled into the streets, neon signs hummed, the air smelled of cigarette smoke, perfume, sweat, and illegal whiskey. On Monday night, September 16th, 1935, the Cotton Club was more than a nightclub. It was a pressure chamber where race, money, power, and arrogance all collided. Inside, more than 200 patrons filled every table. The band was loud, the laughter louder. White downtown elites sat shoulder to shoulder with politicians, celebrities, crooked cops, and gangsters who ran half of New York from the shadows. Liquor flowed freely despite prohibition, because rules didn't apply to places like this. They never had. Near the back of the club, away from the spotlight and the noise, Ellsworth Bumpy Johnson sat alone. He didn't drink fast. He didn't talk much. He didn't laugh. He watched. Bumpy Johnson had learned long ago that power didn't announce itself. Power observed. Power waited. Power remembered. No one paid him much attention. That was the mistake people always made with Bumpy. He didn't dress flashy. He didn't posture. He didn't need to. His reputation lived in Harlem's streets, not in white-owned nightclubs. That changed when Dutch Schultz stood up. Schultz was already drunk, on whiskey, on ego, on the certainty that the world belonged to him. He was one of the most powerful bootleggers in America, a man whose organization pulled in tens of millions of dollars a year. He was used to being feared, used to being obeyed, used to walking into any room and owning it, and that night, something had been eating at him. For months, Harlem hadn't bent the way it was supposed to. Policy banks resisted, collectors disappeared, payments slowed, and every roadblock led back to one name: Bumpy Johnson. Schultz's face was red as he stomped across the club, his bodyguards scrambling behind him. Conversations stopped, heads turned. Even the band sensed something was wrong. The music faltered, then died. Schultz reached Johnson's table and slammed his hand down so hard the bourbon glass jumped. And then he exploded. His voice cut through the Cotton Club like a blade. Loud, ugly, deliberate. The insults weren't whispered. They were shouted, racial, cruel, meant to humiliate, meant to remind everyone in the room who he thought was superior and who he believed had no place challenging him. The club went silent. Even in 1935, even in a whites-only club built on exploitation, people understood what they were witnessing. This wasn't business. This wasn't strategy. This was hatred. Bumpy Johnson didn't move. He didn't stand. He didn't reach for the gun he carried. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't react at all. He waited. That silence unsettled people, far more than anger would have. When Schultz finally stopped shouting, breathing hard, smiling like a man certain he'd just crushed someone publicly, Bumpy Johnson looked up. His voice was quiet. So quiet people leaned forward to hear it. So calm it felt unreal. So cold that later, witnesses would say it frightened them more than any scream ever could. "You've got 7 days," Johnson said. 7 days to get every one of your people out of Harlem. The words landed like ice. "After that," he continued, "any white man I find running policy in my neighborhood dies. No threats, no emotion, no heat, just certainty." Schultz laughed, loud, booming, theatrical. The laugh of a man who believed he was untouchable. He turned to the room, mocking, playing to the crowd. Then back to Johnson. "In 7 days," Schultz said, "you'll be working for me, or you'll be dead." Bumpy Johnson said nothing more. He finished his drink, stood slowly, walked past Schultz, past the bodyguards, out into the Harlem night. Behind him, Schultz kept laughing. He went to bed that night convinced he'd won. 6 hours and 43 minutes later, the first body was found. What most people misunderstand about that night is this: the war didn't start at the Cotton Club. It ended there, because Bumpy Johnson didn't leave angry. He left resolved. As he walked through Harlem's streets toward his apartment, his mind wasn't racing. It was calculating. He had watched Dutch Schultz for over a year, watched him push out black operators with money, intimidation, and brute force, watched him mistake fear for control. Schultz thought violence alone could rule Harlem. That was his fatal error. Harlem ran on trust, on community, on the understanding that even criminals were still from the neighborhood. Schultz's men weren't. They collected money with contempt. They used force publicly. They created enemies faster than they created profit. And worst of all, Schultz made it personal. Public humiliation wasn't just an insult to Bumpy Johnson. It was an insult to Harlem itself. That gave Johnson something no gangster could buy: moral authority. By the time Johnson reached his apartment, the plan was already forming. Not chaos, not revenge. Precision. Silence first. Disappearance. Let Schultz believe he'd scared Johnson into hiding. Then removal. Not Schultz himself. That would bring retaliation from every white syndicate in the city. Instead, the men who made Schultz's Harlem operation function: collectors, enforcers, managers. 8 names, 7 days. One message. Before dawn, Johnson met with his most trusted men. No speeches, no debate, just instructions. Harlem will protect us, he told them, because this isn't business anymore. By sunrise, he was gone, and by morning, the city would wake up to a body and a warning. Harlem woke up Tuesday morning already uneasy. Word traveled faster than newspapers ever could. Something had happened at the Cotton Club. Something bad. Something that didn't end when the doors closed and the music stopped. People who'd been there didn't repeat the slurs, didn't dramatize the shouting. They just said one thing over and over: Dutch Schultz crossed a line. By the time sanitation workers discovered the body behind the warehouse on West 145th Street, that unease turned into certainty. Vincent Clutch Mell was not just dead. He had been made an example of. Police officers who'd seen hundreds of murders knew immediately this wasn't random. The positioning of the body, the care taken to ensure it would be found early, the note written simply, without flourish or signature. 1 down, 7 to go. Leave Harlem. That message rippled outward like a shockwave. By mid-morning, Harlem's policy runners stopped showing up for work. Collectors hesitated before making rounds. Some didn't go out at all. Mothers pulled their children closer when unfamiliar cars slowed near corners. Shop owners whispered behind counters. This wasn't fear of violence. This was recognition of order being enforced. Dutch Schultz received the news while eating breakfast in the Bronx. At first, he dismissed it as coincidence. Gangsters died every day. Harlem was violent. Notes were cheap theatrics. Then, he read the exact wording. 7 days. The same words Bumpy Johnson had spoken in the Cotton Club. The laughter drained from Schultz's face. Within hours, he unleashed his organization. Money for information. Threats for silence. Men sent into Harlem to ask questions. Flip people. Intimidate shopkeepers. Scare runners into talking. Nothing worked. Doors closed. Eyes looked away. Answers were vague or non-existent, because Harlem hadn't forgotten Monday night. People remembered the way Schultz spoke, the way he shouted, the way he treated one of their own like he was less than human. That humiliation burned deeper than fear ever could. Helping Schultz now would mean choosing his side against Harlem itself. No one made that choice. That same afternoon, an envelope slid under the door of Schultz's headquarters. 1 down. 7 to go. The next one dies today. No signature. No threats beyond what had already been promised. Schultz exploded. He screamed at his lieutenants, ordered safe houses, armed escorts, doubled guards. He wanted Johnson found immediately, dead or alive. But Johnson was already gone. His apartment empty, his operations quiet. His presence erased so completely, it was as if he'd never existed at all. And that was the second mistake Schultz made. He assumed absence meant weakness. At 2:15 p.m., Raymond Red Sullivan was found in an abandoned building on Lenox Avenue. 1 shot. clean, professional. His two newly assigned bodyguards lay nearby, evidence of a brief fight they never had a chance to win. Pin to Sullivan's coat, 2 down, 6 to go. By Wednesday night, fear had replaced denial. Schultz's Harlem operators stopped sleeping. Some drank themselves numb. Others prayed. A few quietly tried to disappear, hoping distance might save them. It didn't. Thursday morning brought another envelope. Every day you stay in Harlem, another one dies. That night, Thomas Little Tommy Brennan was found in his apartment. No robbery. No struggle with strangers. Just the unmistakable signature of someone who knew exactly who he was and why he was dying. 3 down, 5 to go. By now, the pattern was undeniable. 1 per day, no mistakes, no hesitation. And still, no sign of Bumpy Johnson. Schultz held an emergency meeting. He demanded scorched earth retaliation. Burn Harlem if necessary. Kill anyone connected. Make examples. But even his own men hesitated. They understood something Schultz did not. This wasn't chaos, this was discipline. Someone was choosing targets carefully, timing each move, sending messages meant to break infrastructure, not provoke open war. By Friday morning, Anthony Little Tony Benedetto was dead. By Friday afternoon, Joseph Joey Numbers Catalano was executed in a public restaurant, in front of witnesses who would later swear the killers walked in calmly, fired, and walked out without running. No panic, no rush, just certainty. 6 down, 2 to go. That evening's envelope was different. Longer, clearer. It explained why. This wasn't about money. This wasn't about territory. This was about respect. And now, Schultz understood the trap he'd walked into. Every hour he stayed in Harlem, he looked weaker. Every body proved Johnson wasn't bluffing. And every attempt to retaliate failed, because the community itself had turned against him. Harlem wasn't hiding Johnson. Harlem was Johnson. Saturday brought the 7th death. Harold Bunny Weinstein, killed in broad daylight outside Harlem entirely. Midtown, public, symbolic. 7 down, 1 to go. That was when Schultz broke. He barricaded himself in. Surrounded by guards, sent frantic messages to the last remaining man on the list, ordering him into hiding, promising protection. But promises mean nothing once inevitability sets in. Sunday night, fire lit up the Bronx sky, and when the smoke cleared, the final note remained. 8 down, 0 to go. Harlem belongs to Harlem. By Monday morning, Dutch Schultz surrendered Harlem without a fight. No negotiations, no conditions. He simply left, and the criminal world took notes. Because what they had witnessed wasn't just a gang war, it was a lesson written slowly, deliberately. 1 name per day. And somewhere, still unseen, Bumpy Johnson waited for the final chapter to be understood. Monday morning, September 23, 1935, arrived quietly. No gunfire, no sirens, no bodies. That silence was louder than everything that had come before it. Dutch Schultz sat alone in his headquarters, a man reduced from fury to calculation. 8 men gone, 8 pillars of his Harlem operation erased in 7 days, with mechanical certainty. Not randomness, not rage, precision. And worse than the deaths themselves was what they represented. Schultz hadn't been beaten by a bigger army. He hadn't been overpowered by money. He hadn't even been outgunned. He'd been out-understood. An envelope arrived mid-morning. Inside was the final message. No threats this time, no countdown, no drama, just facts. You humiliated me publicly. You turned business into disrespect. You made this about race and superiority. 8 men died because of that choice. You have 24 hours to close every Harlem operation. After that, I expand the list. This isn't about territory anymore. This is about teaching you and everyone watching how power really works. Bumpy Johnson Schultz didn't tear the letter up, didn't curse, didn't shout. He read it twice. Then, he gave the order. By Tuesday evening, Schultz's Harlem operation was gone. Collectors pulled out, banks shut down. Enforcers vanished. Cars rolled north and west, leaving behind corners that had already shifted loyalty. 18 months of planning, millions of dollars, all abandoned. Not because Schultz lacked resources, but because he lacked legitimacy. And the underworld noticed. Stories spread quickly in speakeasies, gambling houses, social clubs, and back rooms across New York. They were told quietly at first, then with awe. Dutch Schultz, the man who never backed down, had insulted Bumpy Johnson in public. 7 days later, 8 of his men were dead. The message embedded itself deeply into criminal memory. This wasn't just a victory, it was a rule change. White gangsters who dealt with black operators afterward became careful. Language softened, jokes disappeared. Public disrespect vanished almost overnight. Because now there was proof. Proof that racial contempt carried consequences. Proof that Harlem wasn't just territory. It was community. Proof that power didn't belong exclusively to those who believed they were entitled to it. On Tuesday morning, September 24th, Bumpy Johnson reappeared. No announcement, no protection detail, no dramatic return. He walked down Lenox Avenue like a man who'd never left. People noticed. Shopkeepers nodded, runners straightened. Conversations paused briefly, then resumed. Harlem absorbed him back into itself naturally, like a heartbeat returning to rhythm. Reporters eventually found him. They asked about the murders, about Schultz, about the war everyone knew had happened, without ever seeing a battlefield. Johnson's response was simple. Harlem protects its own, he said. Anybody who comes here disrespecting our people learns something real fast. He paused, then added, choices have consequences. That was all. 1 month later, Dutch Schultz was dead, killed by white syndicate hitmen who decided he'd become a liability. Too reckless, too loud, too prone to drawing attention that endangered everyone. Ironically, Schultz died the same way he'd lived, by underestimating consequences. Bumpy Johnson, meanwhile, absorbed the vacuum Schultz left behind. Not loudly, not greedily, methodically. He built an empire that lasted decades. But more importantly, he left behind a precedent, a boundary, a line no one forgot again. The criminal underworld didn't become kinder, it didn't become fair, but it became careful. Because everyone remembered what happened when arrogance met patience, when entitlement met strategy, when disrespect met discipline. 8 bodies in 7 days wasn't just vengeance, it was instruction. And that instruction echoed long after the men involved were gone. In Harlem, respect was no longer optional, it was survival.